What's up guys, Coach Az here. Today I want to take a look at Robert the Reaper Whittaker. One of our subscribers has asked me to do a breakdown of his striking, and after his amazing performance last night against Kelvin Gastelum, I feel like now's the right time to take a look at why they call him the Reaper. In order to do this, we're going to take a look at three separate areas. One is going to be guard and stance, two is going to be his attacking techniques, and three is going to be his counters. If you didn't already know, Robert Whittaker has a traditional karate background, practicing Goju-Ryu karate from the age of 7 till around the age of 15 where he achieved his black belt. A lot of what you see him doing in the octagon can be traced back to his karate roots, and I'm going to try and explain and break that down for you in today's video. Let's start with how he utilizes his stance and guard as well as his footwork. I think this is one of the most interesting areas of study for him. He is extremely deceptive with how he moves his feet, and his guard breaks a lot of the traditional rules that we talk about if we're talking about boxing and Muay Thai. Rob can often be seen utilizing a pretty traditional karate stance, very wide in the feet, weight balanced on both, and lightly bouncing on the balls of the foot. His guard is often extremely low, especially his lead arm can be as low as his hip. His back arm normally sits somewhere between his midriff and his chest. All of this combined together gives him a low center of gravity. And this is really important for what he's trying to do and achieve with it. Going back to his karate roots, a lot of karate-based sparring is done on a points fighting system. So for any of you that are unfamiliar with this, points fighting means that you will initiate combat and try to score a technique on your opponent. If you score the technique, the referee will call stop, he will reset the two fighters, and you'll reinitiate the bout. The idea being that the person with the most points at the end of the fight is the winner. Now, many karate styles receive a lot of criticism for this form of fighting, but one of the huge benefits of it is that it provides fighters with a real keen understanding of one of the key principles of fighting: hit and don't get hit. You see, in points fighting, it's a game of who can hit first. If you hit your opponent first, you score. If they hit you first, they score. So your primary mode for defense ends up being your footwork as opposed to your guard. The focus becomes on not being there to be hit in the first place. This background of training allows Rob to be really effective, whether it be moving forward, moving backwards, or lateral movement to avoid attacks from his opponents. The low guard also provides a deceptively different line of attack for Rob's punches. Instead of his jab coming from a classic boxing guard where the jab would come straight at you in a straight line, his is coming from more of a diagonal angle upwards. Often initiating from out of the line of sight of your opponent, it means that they've got less time to react and respond. If you're not used to sparring people who throw punches from this angle, it can also become more difficult to defend. Rob's jab is one of his most effective weapons, and I believe a big reason for that is how he initiates it from a low position, bringing it up in between, around, and through his opponent's guards. This, combined with his elusive footwork, means he has a really effective jab that he can attack his opponent from the outside with, whilst maintaining a safe distance and often causing them to be frustrated and rushing in, walking onto many of his effective counters. Of course, when necessary, Rob can bring the guard up. He often likes to turtle shell when he gets himself into trouble, if he gets pushed against the cage. But again, notice with him, the focus will always be on getting his back off the cage and using his footwork to reset his position. All right, let's take a look at his attacking techniques. Robert is a great example of someone who believes in the principles that basics win fights. Seldom will you see him throw a spinning or jumping technique. He wins the fights with the basics. Today we're going to take a look at three of his mainstay combinations and techniques, the things that you'll see him use in almost every one of his fights. Starting with the most famous of his combinations, it has to be that lead arm jab to back leg roundhouse kick. Now you'll see some different subtle variations of this combination when he throws it, but the basic principles remain the same. Rob flicks his jab up to the head, mostly as a distraction, as a way of drawing his opponent's eye and covering up their vision. This can often be seen being followed up with the rear hand, but again, not to cause damage, not even really to land, but to cause a distraction and set up this rear leg head kick. Whittaker lands this kick with his shin, sometimes with his ankle, and occasionally even with his foot. The reasoning behind this is because he can throw it from all different distances, and regardless of how his opponents react to the setup. If his opponent moves forward or steps into range, he hits them with the shin. If they hold their ground at the end of his punches, he normally wraps around his ankle. And if they choose to back up, he can catch them with the foot on the way out. I did a video previously discussing the pros and cons of attacking with the foot or the shin, and Rob is a great example of how all options are viable depending on the situation. The hands, as well as providing the distraction, also allow Rob to get the ideal setup, rotating his hips into that kick, turning it over, and landing with maximum power and efficiency. The next technique we're going to look at is the Blitz In Cross. The cross is often a follow-up on the jab, and as I've said before, Rob works a lot behind his jab. He's light on his feet and he'll just throw that lead arm up and pick away at the head. However, on occasion, you'll see Rob blitzing in with his rear arm to initiate a combination. Again, going back to his karate roots, the blitz was a technique that would be often utilized in points fighting to drive forward and hit your opponent quickly from outside range. He has adapted this for MMA by keeping his wide and balanced stance and driving in, rotating his shoulder, bringing that rear arm through to the head. If you go back and watch many of the instances where he throws this technique, you'll often see the shock on his opponent's face because he's able to land it from so far out. This is by having great mobility in his shoulders and a real good understanding of how to extend that punch properly. The cross, of course, is a power technique all of itself, but this driving forward blitzing motion only adds to it. He'll often simply land this and then break away to reset, but he can be seen also following it up with lead hook or longer combinations depending on how his opponent is affected by that initial shot. This is a great example of getting your opponent to think one thing is coming to only then mix it up and throw an alternative. Finally, for his attacks, we're going to take a look at that sliding oblique kick or sliding side kick to the knee. This has been more of a recent addition to Rob's arsenal. I believe you'd first see it actually used on him by Yoel Romero in their first fight. Yoel used this on him early in the fight, damaging and compromising his knee. In the rematch, you saw Whittaker take this back to Yoel, and he's been using it in fights ever since. The idea of this technique is that we raise our lead leg chamber and we slide in off of that back foot, driving that side kick into the outside of the knee. The idea, of course, is that we're trying to hyperextend the knee and cause damage to the ligaments and tendons. This technique is a great example of something that's low risk and high reward. The low risk comes from the fact that you're not lifting your leg very high. So that means that you can quickly attack, reset yourself, and have your feet back underneath you. It doesn't require much momentum from the rest of your body, so you can maintain your guard and you can stay relatively upright when throwing it. So similar to probing someone with a jab, if you hit them with it, great. And if you don't, you haven't put yourself into a compromised position trying. Even if you fail to land the initial strike, Rob, as an example, will often be seen following up with his hands afterwards, drawing his opponent's attention down with the kick to then open up his hands to land over the top. This technique can also be thrown off of a one-step motion, but that sliding motion really helps to disguise the kick behind the movement, making it far more effective at landing. Finally, we're going to take a look at Robert's counter techniques. I think one of the things that make him so effective is his ability to fight both moving forward as an attacking fighter, but also on the back foot when being attacked as a counter fighter. Rob is very good at disrupting his opponents as they try to initiate an attack. His first counter is actually his jab. Again, where it comes from that awkward down angle and comes up into the face, Rob will often just pick it out and throw it at an opponent as they try to step in on him. This interruption is enough to cause his opponents to reset and break the rhythm of their forward attack. Again, it's not the most devastating shot in the world, but it disrupts the opponent's rhythm. It ruins their momentum coming forward and forces them to reset back to a distance where Robert is leading the dance. A more devastating counter you'll see him using is his check hook. He uses this really effectively moving backwards, pivoting off of his lead foot and bringing that hook round up to the chin or to the temple. There's even examples of Rob doing this, basically running backwards, being on the back foot against opponents that are driving in, frustrated with his distance management. Again, taking advantage of that low guard position to swoop that hook up and over the top, bringing it to the opponent's blind side. And finally, the lead leg inside leg kick. Rob fights in an orthodox stance, which means that he fights from left leg forward. The majority of opponents he faces do the same, so this means that they're open to that inside lead leg kick. Once again, we can attribute this back to his karate origins, that ability to just quickly lift the lead leg and snap out the kick with it. Similar to that jab counter, it's not the most damaging kick in the world, but it's very frustrating. It does cause an opponent to be taken off balance, and it does disrupt their rhythm and momentum moving forward. Rob will often follow this with his jab, depending on how his opponents react, or with his lead arm hook. Against a southpaw opponent, where they'd be right leg forward and they'd be competing in a more open stance, Rob still attacks that inside lead leg, often now with the rear leg roundhouse kick coming round to the outside. I think Robert Whittaker is one of the most well-rounded strikers in the UFC, and it's really great to see him having a resurgence since losing his belt to Stylebender. I think he's at his best when he's calm and collected, really focusing on good distance management and being forward attacking most of the time, using his counters to disrupt his opponents, stop them from creating any momentum moving forward, and throwing his own attacks as a response. So guys, I hope you've learned something from today's video. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, more new videos coming next week. If you want to see me break down another fighter's striking style, let me know in the comments below, and I will see you on the next one.